So our next speaker is Dr. Somshila Murthy, who heads the cornea and anterior segment services at LVPI. And she's also a member scientific committee, very capable, dynamic, and versatile. And she's going to talk on anterior scleritis, diagnosis and treatment approach. On to you, Dr. Somshila.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chitra. I'm going to play actually a video, and it has the same talk, to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present at this meeting. When we talk about the practical approach of scleritis, the important questions to ask is, how frequently do you see scleritis in your clinic? How confident are you in managing this disease? Do you have availability of good lab facility for systemic investigations or microbiology? And do you have access to rheumatology colleagues with whom you can collaborate? Luckily, scleritis is rare. The prevalence is roughly 6 cases per 100,000 population. However, about 10 to 50% of these patients can have underlying systemic associations, and another 5 to 20% of cases can be associated with infections. So coming to the answer to the first question, how frequently do you see scleritis in your clinic? If the answer is that you rarely see, in that case, it's enough for you to be able to diagnose a case of scleritis. And also, if you can give a differential diagnosis of immune versus infectious scleritis, anterior versus a posterior scleritis, and if it is anterior, be able to differentiate between necrotizing versus a non-necrotizing scleritis. It is also enough for you to be able to start the patient on oral NSAIDs, topical corticosteroids for the immune-mediated variety, and in case it is infectious, to start the patient on broad-spectrum topical and oral antibiotics, and then refer the patient to a higher center or to a colleague who regularly deals with these cases. However, if you often or frequently see these cases, or you would like to know the management, or you work in a remote place and patient cannot travel, then you really need to know about the management of scleritis. Episcleritis is an innocuous disease where the patient presents with irritation and absence of pain. Classically, there would be blanching of the inflammation or the congestion with phenylephrine. Should you investigate? I think it's not required. Certainly for the first few episodes, I don't. You may perform investigations similar to scleritis cases. The management involves using topical NSAIDs, using low-dose steroids or potent topical corticosteroids, which can be repeated as and when required. Coming to various clinical entities in scleritis, this includes diffuse anterior scleritis. In this example, you can see a patient with mild to moderate anterior scleritis. In the second example of diffuse anterior, you see a patient with severe anterior scleritis. The picture on your left side lower shows the uveal hue, which suggests that there were past episodes and this is scleral thinning. The right lower picture shows the presence of ischemic necrosis that is just happening at the limbal area. Necrotizing scleritis is very dramatic and easy to diagnose because of its very severe presentation. Nodular scleritis also, you can see large to small nodules of various sizes, as well as various findings whether the nodules include focal area of ischemic necrosis. Scleromalacia perforans is a condition which is associated with rheumatoid arthritis. The patient can present with a swan neck kind of deformity of the fingers, as you can see in the picture on your left, which is of an elderly man, or the patient can also have joint effusion, as in the picture on your right, which is of a female patient and present with scleromalacia perforans. In posterior scleritis, patients were present with pain on ocular movements, also hardly have any inflammation anteriorly, but have blurred vision, and examination would show what looks like choroiditis even on FFA. But when you do a B scan, you can see choroidal thickening and accumulation of fluid in the subtenon space, which is a classic sign for. So this is a case of necrotizing scleritis with PUK. Mamta had described something like this earlier. So this particular patient had Wegener's granulomatosis, but we had a similar case which turned out to be maybe a secondary infection. So patients with PUK and necrotizing scleritis can have systemic necrotizing scleritis with peripheral ulcerative. So how to proceed in case of scleritis? We should know the anatomical diagnosis. The age and gender would help us decide the etiology as well as help us manage. The severity is required to see how aggressive we need to be and what is the systemic component. The classification that was first described by Watson and Harry way back in 1976 still holds good. They had divided immune-mediated scleritis as anterior and posterior, and further subdivided anterior as necrotizing and non-necrotizing. So if I have a patient who has anterior non-necrotizing diffuse scleritis, these patients are perhaps easier to manage, less likely to have reactivations, and may not need very long-term therapy. So when do you do lab investigations? Lab investigations in episcleritis only if it is persistent or recurrent in my experience. I always investigate all scleritis and not just the bilateral ones. I always investigate the unilateral necrotizing aggressively and in those patients where I suspect infection. The screening evaluation that we do would include non-specific acute phase reactants as well as more specific investigations such as rheumatoid factor and ANCA antibody testing. The other investigations such as TPHA and Mantoux test, etc., are done to rule out any other infection that the patient may have. And all of these are subject to interpretation in the context of the patient that we are seeing. So to divide the investigation, certain investigations are done because you're going to start the patient on immunomodulators. So for fitness, the second group are for reaching an etiological diagnosis, which include RA and ANA and ANCA. And also the last group would be the local investigations, which are done, for example, ASOCT or ultrasound biomicroscopy, B-scan, microbiological workup in infection, impression cytology in a suspected masquerade, and the rare case of scleral biopsy when we want to do PCR for biopsies. So therapy can be put into 4 or 5 steps. The first line treatment includes oral NSAIDs and topical corticosteroids. This can be used for the milder cases. Most of the time, we don't see this case in our practice in a tertiary institute. So we often see patients who have failed this treatment. So most of the time, we start the patient on second line, which is systemic steroids. And if the patients are the milder variety, they will do well. And we can maintain them on oral NSAIDs or occasionally if they have a reactivation with transseptal injection. But if there's poor therapeutic response or we need to use agents for a long term, then we need steroid-sparing agents such as methotrexate or mycophenolate mofetil or azathioprine for long-term therapy for these patients. So in the practice that where I am, we use systemic steroids and methotrexate almost simultaneously in most of the cases, and minor reactivations managed with topical or transseptal. The more aggressive patients with systemic disease, we manage with cyclophosphamide infusions. And of course, the fourth line therapy includes the biological agents and the JAK kinase inhibitors. In these cases, we collaborate with the rheumatologist. So to conclude, immune-mediated scleritis is rare, but it can be extremely challenging. The mainstay of treatment for us is oral steroids, but we can't use oral steroids for a very long time. So we have to start the patient upfront on immunomodulator therapy. The newer agents are really a boon for both for refractory cases and in those cases where oral steroids or other agents are contraindicated. And it is best to collaborate with the rheumatologist for many of these cases, especially for instituting therapy with biological agents. So
that's all I had, Dr. Chitra, for my presentation within 8 minutes. So I'm trying to stick.
I know. We definitely gave a lot to muse on a lot of information. Dr. Praveen, question from you.
No, I just have to appreciate Somshila for making a video and sticking to 8 minutes because, I mean, in a session where you have so many talks, it does make sense. Yeah. But then Somshila, again, I think just for the sake of, the understanding of all the postgraduate students, I think 2 things that tend to become very confusing is identifying scleritis as scleritis for sure, and being able to say this is definitely scleritis and start on either investigations or therapy. And secondly, differentiating infectious scleritis from non-infectious scleritis with confidence. I think those 2 issues, I think a lot of people face. So how would you actually say that we should do that?
So actually, I agree that this should probably have been the focus of my presentation rather than management. I think I should have probably just stuck to the absolute basics of identification of scleritis. Mm-hmm. So I did take everyone through the gamut of various scleritis. And when it is very obvious in the sense that when you have the diffuse severe form of anterior scleritis, then it doesn't get missed. Sometimes when you have necrotizing scleritis, then you can get confused between infectious versus non-infectious. So scleritis is it's a difficult diagnosis for a resident to make because even experienced practitioners sometimes fail at the diagnosis, certainly fail at recognizing one over the other entity. And even very experienced practitioners, day in and day out, misrecognize this. So it could be scleritis, but it's mistaken for another inflammation like anterior uveitis and so on. So the typical signs that are mentioned in the book are there for everyone, that you have diffuse, deep congestion, the patient comes with hallmark classical pain. So pain is a very, very important component. If a patient doesn't have pain, however red the eye may be, and the patient has not already received treatment, then I would really not have scleritis in my differential. It would be an extremely rare patient who's not on therapy and doesn't have pain, but we think that it's scleritis. So for the resident, I think that the symptomatology of pain and the sign of a very congested, deeply congested eye, maybe slight chronicity in that, this would be indicators for scleritis. And once you see scleritis, use the classification that I had shown for the PG students, a very basic classification that will divide it into anterior and into infectious and non-infectious, and then anterior and posterior. So that is really a very good clue for all practitioners, actually, not just the resident, to utilize. And once you have the symptomatology of scleritis, then look for additional features such as, are there any necrotic areas? Did the patient have history of trauma or a recent surgery? And clearly, if there is pus points, it's very easy to make the diagnosis. But sometimes you can have very hidden infections. So that's when it becomes difficult for all. So if a resident could just basically differentiate, that's the reason why I said that it depends on where you are. So if you could differentiate that and pick up that it is scleritis, then I think the management is a bit more specialized, unless you're the only ophthalmologist for the patient. So for the management, I think it's good to start initial therapy and refer the patient.
If a patient needs a cataract surgery in this group, how long would you wait for the eye to be quiet before you suggest it? And what would be the protocol during the surgery and post?
So scleritis is slightly different from uveitis in the sense that, of course, you need a quiescent period. Just rule of thumb, we use 3 months for almost all diseases that we have. So 3 months is really good. If it's most of these scleritis, the cataract surgical outcome is usually extremely good. So if the patients have been very well controlled, no reactivation for the past 3 months plus, then you don't need to really change your regimen much. So in fact, slight complexity would be where to place the incision, especially if you have huge staphyloma from previous scleritis or a lot of thinning. So obviously you can't place your incision in the sclera. So you'll have to place your incision in the cornea. So if it's something like either you do an ECC, which is clear corneal, or simply phaco, and look for high astigmatism. So the inflammation control is not an issue if the patient is very well controlled. But you can perioperatively step up the steroids, just like for the uveitis patients. But for most of the scleritis cases, at least in the practice that I practice, and in most of the recommendation is that you don't need to really step up anything for scleritis.
Any of our expert panel, Dr. Merle, Himanshu, Dr. Namrata, anything to add? Dr. Revati?
Somshila, can I ask you one question? For infectious scleritis, when we have proved infectious scleritis and you have significant amount of scleral melt, what would you do? Would you de-roof the conjunctiva, and do you put a patch graft immediately? Do you wait for it? When can we put a patch graft? Because sometimes they look really bad and scary. So do you put a patch graft immediately, or do you wait for it to resolve and then put patch graft? Does it perforate actually in such kind of scleritis?
So because we've had all examples, so sometimes you have what I would say fulminant end-stage infective scleritis, then nothing can be done. So unfortunately, we're already lost the eye, where there's huge amount of scleral exposure, eye may be hypotenuse, they're already choroidals. So they're just doing heroic surgery and really superhuman surgery of putting in a large patch graft. Really practical, it may not work. So the question that you're looking at is, what is the cutoff, and when do you put a patch graft? So the cutoff would be that if we think that the extent is not going beyond the equator, we can actually almost visualize the posterior part of the thinning. And do you put a patch graft in active infection? So no. So once you identify the organism and you've started institute the antimicrobial therapy or antifungal or whichever is the organism, then wait for some healing. And after that, if the tectonicity is threatened, then I would go with the patch graft. So not initially. sometimes as more as the, because the surgeon is more scared. So sometimes we do put an AMG at the end of surgery, just for some tectonic support. And the drugs can still penetrate somewhat through AMG. The problem is drug penetration. So you don't want to block it with the patch graft.
Thank you very much, Dr. Somshila. That was a great talk.
Can I ask one question?
Yes, Namrata. Yes.
Somshila, I just wanted to know how many of the what percentage of your cases of scleritis you would start, immunosuppressive therapy, and they're controlled only by immunosuppressive therapy and not by, not by just topical steroids or topical therapy. How many would you actually have to give, your systemic immunosuppression, and what percentage do you go in for biologicals?
So that's in my presentation, as I showed, that somehow the very simple cases don't seem to come to us. So the cases we have, they've already failed simple therapy of topical medication. So almost 90+% patients of mine would be on immunomodulator therapy, some or the other. And of this, the recalcitrant ones, and that percentage is moving up and up. So when we see that, say, methotrexate is not enough, or even full dose, or combining two drugs are not enough, so that percentage would be about 5 to 10%. We would have started biologicals because of, especially in vaginas, also depends on the indication. So if we have GPA or bad rheumatoid arthritis with scleritis, so these patients, we would sort of tend towards taking them towards biologicals. And that percentage is going up more and more as our experience increases.